Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Rajesh Chandran. And with me today, I have a really special guest, Robin Jose. I've been fortunate enough to work with Robin back in his days at Cisco and also witness his meteoric rise at Cisco and beyond. And we'll talk about that. Robin, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Okay, Robin, just ways of introduction for folks. Robin is a seasoned tech and product leader, and he was at Cisco, followed by Reliance Jio, EMC, some of the global heavyweights, working on data analytics and IoT. After that, he landed in Germany and started his journey in terms of building startups and being part of a startup ecosystem. Eventually, to be the chief data officer at WeFox, which is an insurtech, fintech unicorn, and then has left to really start a startup ecosystem, including angel investing, his own firm, Synergy 24, who is AIGIST firm, AIGIST, which leads AI transformation for enterprises. Robin, you've been really busy. And once again, welcome to the show and glad to have you here. You're one of the few people I know who really made a successful transition from corporate to a startup environment, right? A lot of people, they've done startups for a long time, but you've managed to make that transition happen. Could you tell us a little bit more about that transition and what was that kind of burning itch or desire to that caused you to take that leap and land in Germany and go on this transformative journey?
Happy to. I could say that there was a pattern in this whole thing, but honestly, it's been a series of exciting experiments, right? So I think I leave the full arc, large enterprises, hyperscalers, startup as a startup founder, and also as an investor. I played some senior roles, as you mentioned, right, as the VP and head of data platforms for Reliance Jio. I guess I was responsible for some of the parts related to Geo launch in VFox. I joined at it very early stage of the journey in 2018 in Berlin, 30 million revenues or something like that. And in 5 years, we scaled it to about 650 million in revenues. So that's kind of like a crazy scale, and also to a valuation of 4.5 billion. I've been quite happy with some of the things I've done. But one of the things I also realized, as I mentioned, is that it's a series of exciting experiments. I didn't arrive at something, I iterated. In a way, I'm still iterating, right? There was an enterprise iteration, there's a hyperscale iteration, there's a startup iteration. Now I'm doing an investor iteration. Currently, I wear three hats. As a founder and CEO of AIGIST, which is a boutique consulting company based on primarily focused on AI implementations. As a founder and CPO of Cure, which is a Berlin-based health tech startup, and of course as an angel investor and an advisor. Mostly an advisor now. Most of my investments were in 2024. These days, I focus more in terms of working with the founders, especially on the data and AI strategy. The only thing that I can say from the whole thing, right? So, as I said, it's been a series of exciting experiments, and I didn't really plan. I mean, none of us can really plan your career over a 20-year period like this, right? So, I always believe that you should run towards the roar or what excites you. So you go where the biggest challenges and most interesting problems are for you personally. And for me, that roar has shifted from stability, which is kind of like what we started 20 years back. There were really no startups. I mean, you get out of the school and then you decide to work for a large corporate because that's the only job that you get. So it's shifted from stability and growth to scale and then to creation. And now creation is what I find my passion in.
Okay. No, I love the way you framed it, stability to growth to scale to creation. So along the way, I mean, this is as much about product and technology as much about leadership, right? What has been, what has helped you in terms of your formative years, if I may, as a senior leader in all of these tech companies that you led? And then, what lessons were you able to, or strengths were you able to take from there and apply it to the startup world, or was it starting everything from scratch, or did some of this help you with your building up a leadership team in VFox, so on and so forth?
Yeah. One single lesson, if I could say, is applicable across, right? All of these things that I did is that the single greatest predictor of success and happiness of any project that you work on is the who, right? The team you're with, the leaders you work for, the people you serve. A great team can salvage a mediocre idea, and a bad team can absolutely ruin even the best idea. So that's one thing that's the same across anywhere, right? So whether you are in a large corporate or a startup or somewhere in between, it's true across. The other things were different. For example, the biggest shock was the speed and the ambiguity, right? In a large company, in an enterprise, you operate with a playbook. In a startup, you are writing the playbook as you go, and sometimes often in the back of a napkin as the plane is taking off. So the most important thing I had to unlearn, and I had to unlearn a lot of things, right? When I moved from a startup to, the other way around, from an enterprise to a startup. The most important thing I had to unlearn was this pursuit of what is good enough, right? Or like the pursuit of perfection. In a mature company, you aim for a 99% solution or at least a 95% solution. In a startup, a 70% solution that you can get into the hands of a customer today is much more important. So in big companies, you optimize. In startup, you oxygenate. And that also shows in terms of the culture, right? So in the end, the risk is there everywhere, right? I've seen VPs, directors, and engineers get fired unceremoniously from large corporates, right? We've both seen it happen. There are risks in a large corporate, but the risks are in terms of most enterprise leaders worry about career risk. A failure could mean that they get fired, and the primary motive from that perspective is not to screw up. And the end result of that is a lack of innovation at worst, or slow innovation at best, because you just don't want to make a mistake, and that has a cost in its own. Startups are in a completely different level of fear, and they fear an existential risk. It's not whether your job is there tomorrow, it's more like whether you have a company tomorrow. It's a completely different level of risk. If you play safe, the company is dead anyway. A more lean, more hungry, more ambitious company will come and eat you, right? And they will build a better product. So you make a lot of compromises in a startup because you learn to live for another day. So the style is different, the team is different, the approach is different, and the speed in a startup is to be considered from that angle, right? It's not recklessness, it's a respect for reality. But as you said, there is one thing that stays the same, and that's a great team, because that's what makes it fun. That also is what that makes you go to office in the morning or get excited about work, and that is also a huge determining factor for success.
Yeah, something you said resonated with me, right? So Andy Jassy talked about leaders who are looking at accomplishments, and when you want to be associated with accomplishments, then you tend to be conservative. You tend not to want to make mistakes. Where the leaders who are okay to end up looking like complete fools, and we can call it a failure, you can call it a mistake, call it what you want. They are the ones who kind of evolve and thrive, right? So are you an accomplishments based leader, or are you somebody like willing to take risks, do things? Again, it could be large, medium, small size of the organization, and more often than not prevail, right? I think that was something I took away, and I think it validates based on your experience as well.
100%.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about product building, right? And you've been at the forefront of the AI movement, right? And I think you started at the data layer, and then you worked your way up. What is fundamentally different about AI product building in your experience at WeFox and all these startups that you work with and you invest in, that is different from fundamental, say, application building, right? Like the software that you and I used to build at Cisco, it's just applications, right? What do you think is fundamentally different about it, and what should builders, engineers, product leaders, think about, right, when they're doing it?
So there's two aspects in there. One is about VFox. I guess we can talk about that a little bit later, but let's talk about product and data and AI. Look, a lot of things have changed, and you know this very well, right? So the kind of applications that we used to build in Cisco are no longer there because everything is changed with SaaS. The first big platform shift that has happened more than a decade ago was in terms of SaaS. So I'd probably compare SaaS products with data products, and of course the AI products, which especially with generative AI and APIs and everything, it's also changing now. But let's talk about as it was, let's say until maybe up to now. Look, at the cost of really providing a bad analogy, it's building a SaaS applications like building a car, right? You kind of like know who the driver is or who wants a car, where they want to go, and you design this beautiful intuitive vehicle to get them there. Right? The user interface is the king. They would like to see, they would like to the car, enjoy it, flaunt it. The workflows are well defined. The success is measured by user engagement and task completion. I mean, a simple way that I can say is that the PMF is visible in the usage heat maps. If I had to just be very elementary about it. So you think about usability, onboarding, activation, time to value, all of those things. Building the data and AI platform is a little bit different. It's like building a high performance engine or a chassis or something like that. Your customer don't directly see it, right? Sometimes you don't even know where it will end up, right? Is that going to end up in a car, or is that a race car? Is that a truck, or is that even a boat? You don't know. Success is measured a little bit by platform's reliability, scalability, and the power and flexibility it gives to the larger business goal. And the focus is a little bit on API and other things, right? So the approach in both of these things are completely different just because of the nature of these two things, which is different. Now, a lot of the AI products now are actually SaaS products, and it will continue in that way because many of the AI products, in a way, are not building AI models or data models underneath, but wrapping around some APIs. But let's look at the larger picture, right? So the key part is there is a lot of underlying things, the engine and the chassis and all these things, which is built on data. And that's an important part to consider, especially if you are the product, because you really need to focus on going from this place to like, what is the real IP that I have, right? Is that the users and user engagement? What is the moat that I have? Is that the number of users I have or something more than that? So those are some of the good questions that we need to start thinking from a PMO perspective, right? The usability, the use cases, the values, and the user engagement. And how am I going to get that and define that for any AI?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that gets talked a lot about and right is deterministic versus non-deterministic output, right? So SaaS application, you mentioned it, predetermined workflows, you kind of know what the output is going to be 9 times out of 10. If it's not, you just raise a ticket, it's a bug and you fix it. Here, the output is, even in the best of circumstances with guardrails and things like that, it may not be what you desired it to be, right? And that's what I think makes it fun and challenging as well, but nerve-wracking if you're a builder because you want to make sure that the customer gets what they expect. And thanks to OpenAI, ChatGPT, and other tools, the bar is so high. And I think that is what I feel is fundamentally different about this shift compared to previous platform shifts, is for customers or consumers, the bar is already so high. So whatever you build, if it's not up to that mark, then they feel like it's not a great product, right? At least that's how I see it. The other
So
question I wanted to ask you is,
if I may interrupt, one addition that I would say is that the bar is high, you're very right. But I would also say that the moat is so low, right? So it's very easy for another company to come and build the same product that you have because a lot of those things are API calls. So you don't have to invent this technology completely on your own. So the moat is so low. Even for a company like OpenAI, like till 2023, a lot of people thought we're the last word when it comes to LLMs is now being challenged very clearly by Claude Code is a better, code builder than OpenAI is, and Gemini is catching up and completely overtaken them in other things. And then there's Quen and other things. So the modes are significantly lower, especially also in the current thing. Sorry, I interrupted you.
yeah, no, I think that was where I was going as well, right? So you read like speed is the moat. I remember when we used to build machine learning products, we always said data is the moat, customer data, so on and so forth. And now it's like speed is the moat. Is speed really the moat here? Because you're absolutely right. Even if you go fast, somebody else can come in and disrupt what you're building. A lot of enterprise SaaS providers claim not to train their models on customer data. At least it's a disclaimer that they put out there. What really happens, nobody knows. So if you're not training on customer data, you're moving fast, but somebody else could move faster, then what is your competitive differentiation? right, are the legacy SaaS providers who've bolted on AI features or AI capabilities or embedded them within their existing products, right? Anybody from Salesforce to ServiceNow to others, do they stand to be the beneficiaries because, quote unquote, they already have a loyal customer base, right? Yes, people may be churning, but a large chunk of customers are still there. They're still paying their subscription versus somebody new who's coming in and trying to, take a chunk of that pie. What would your guidance or advice be to founders in this space?
That's a great question. And honestly, I don't know the answer because I see approaches in both ways which is successful, right? So there are incumbents who have like a huge data advantage and they should win in normal cases because they not only just have the data advantage, but they also have much bigger coffers to invest in building something on top of that. But let's take a few examples, right? Think about GitHub, right? And GitHub Copilot. When you start, for example, I mean, they could say that they have pretty much all the code that's available, pretty much like, I don't know how much percentage of ecosystem that GitHub has, but I would say venture anywhere like 60% or higher. I need to go back and check. When they built the Copilot, and Copilot was the only tool at that point of time who were helping in terms of, I would say, should I say vibe coding or should I say something else? It doesn't matter. But essentially AI assisted development. And so they were the incumbents, and they are supported by Microsoft. I mean, one of the largest companies in the world with nearly infinite amount of R&D budget. However, if you look at the top dogs right now, they're not GitHub Copilot anymore, right? So they are Cursor and okay, Windsurf is pretty much gone, but it's Cursor, Lovable, Replit, and the other guy. So they still disrupted the market. So this is a good example where it doesn't matter to be an incumbent with all the data advantages in the world, somebody can still come and disrupt you. On the other hand, we have examples like companies which is like already built on a massive, scale that they have. For example, Microsoft comes to mind. The Office Copilot is a huge advantage for them. Now, there's always questions about the value of Copilot, but what nobody can argue against is that nobody can that easily replace something like Office Copilot, right? Or GitHub, who's adding, not GitHub, sorry. I guess we're talking about HubSpot, right? So was stuck on the hub there. HubSpot, for example. So Dharmesh is, putting a lot of content out there in terms of how he's experimenting, how he is trying various things in HubSpot, and I'm amazed by the speed in which they build some of these things. The same is with Salesforce. You mentioned Salesforce, and of course, I see a lot of advertisements in terms of like Agentforce and how much effort they're putting in terms of bringing this agentic capability into the system. Now, I cannot say personally anything about it because I haven't experimented on it, right? I'm not using Salesforce anymore. I'm still startup, so I'm more in the in the HubSpot domain than in the Salesforce domain. But there are incumbents who are actually highly successful. So the point that I'm making is very difficult currently to predict who will rise to the top and who will not. Just going back to OpenAI in 2023 and 2024, many people were convinced that Google lost and OpenAI won, and they completely missed this AI wave. And many people were even calling for Sundar Pichai to resign because he was a bad CEO. They're not talking about that anymore, aren't they? Because Gemini is probably one of the best AI models out there. In some cases, it's also beating OpenAI in many things. Veo is an example where image generation is in image and video generation is substantially better than anything Sora has to offer, as an example. So the things change. It's never. I mean, it's in a constant state of flux. Now, one last thing about the speed. Speed is an important aspect, right? But speed in itself, again, purely from my perspective, my humble opinion is that speed in itself doesn't mean anything. Speed as a measure to achieve something means something. So if you still have, I mean, what Replit has, what Cursor has, is an ability to gather, like to capture an enormous amount of users. A lot of them eventually become paying customers, which helps them get more money, get more investment, so they can do more R&D. It also gets them a lot of feedback, which they can take and iterate. And as product people, we always know the value of customer feedback, what they use, what they don't use, what they want, what they get frustrated by. That is gold. That's sheer gold out there, right? Probably even more important than just having data. So that's the distribution part and the user feedback and the PMF part is probably one of the biggest things that speed gives us. Speed in itself is like, I could be going really fast in the wrong direction. But speed with feedback and a clear sense of what PMF means and what value it brings to the customer, that is.
Yeah, so I want to go back to something also you mentioned earlier, which I think is unique in the AI era, which is really small teams, right? In the past, the playbook was, have a core solid team, right? Founders and engineers, they build a product, you start to achieve scale, right? And then you hire and you hire, your team start growing, expanding, and then, you go on to capture more market share. Here, it's kind of the inverse, right? The team stays pretty much flat in some cases, right? A little bit more that you're adding to it. It seems to be very unique to the AI kind of build era, right? So my question to you is: there's always been this fascination with 10x engineer and 10x product manager, right? We always talk about what does a 1% product manager look like? What does a 1% engineer look like? Do you think we're at a place where everybody and maybe a 10% product manager or engineer can become a 1%, right? Thanks to AI and the tools that they embrace? Or is it still a very marked difference between, say, the middle of the pyramid and top of the pyramid in terms of talent? Are we finally at a place where we can bridge that talent? Because not everybody can afford the top talent, right? That the hyperscalers, that some of these leading AI startups that you mentioned, and frankly, talent that you may have access to, right? As a founder investor. So what do the rest of those folks do?
100% we are getting to that place, right? Where the impact of the 10x engineer is, or 10x product manager is more felt than ever, unfortunately, right? So it's probably, but that's the thing with AI, right? So it's going to amplify the differences, not to make them equal. Because what's going to happen is that, let's just start with teams as an example, right? Let's start with engineers as an example. So when we started building, right? So let's say 10 years back, if you think about a company who's about a million in revenues, right? ARR or something like that, we would start thinking about what would the engineering team look like. Then I would say 15 to 20 people, maybe a little higher, depending on how intensive this is, right? That's kind of like the team that I think would be building this. What about now? I would say probably it's 2 people, 3 people, right? That's all the team that it requires, because we went from this place where we needed, 2 pizza teams to a place where you need 2 people and probably a few agents, and that's real. That's very much real. That's here, right? In fact, I work with a lot of founders, and some of them I just say that, look, don't worry about the technical debt. Don't worry about great building scalable code, right? When you have an idea and if you think this idea will work, just go ahead and use Replit, Lovable, whatever, right? Just build it, show it up to the customer, see if the customers like it, validate your idea, then you can always think about scaling it and making it proper. It's a little bit like you're renting rather than building a house, right? So when you're ready to build that house, you already know that there is some form of PMF, the customers like your product, and now you're building for scale. So you already decided that you want to live in the city, and then you're making a big investment in terms of buying that house. That makes a lot of sense. The whole aspect of getting to PMF itself has changed, and it can be done a lot faster and with a lot less people, right? So that's a part of the engineers in itself. And what that means, unfortunately, it's a good and a bad problem, right? It's a good problem because it's immensely easy to now take an idea to PMF, or at least to validation now. But also it means that there are questions about, right, what do the rest of the people do? It's good for the entrepreneurs in one way, because rather than paying for 10 people mediocre salaries, you can pay for one person, right, really good exceptional salary. The social aspects to it we probably won't cover here, because I think there are some significant social impacts to it, which is problematic in nature, but that's a reality. Now, when it comes to product, I think it's just completely off the chart. I mean, a real good AI product manager is kind of like a unicorn, and they can make a huge difference. Because previously they used to just build some, they used to write a PRD, they used to track things in linear or whatever tool that you want to use. But now that's completely different. They can actually connect tools to the, the rapid prototyping tools based on AI to the system. They can take a user feedback and create a prototype in your brand colors, in your brand, template and everything in just hours. They can actually show it to the users. They can get user feedback. All of that happens in just like days, right? Maybe in hours as opposed to weeks. And that makes this, next AI product manager like a unicorn. I would absolutely pay a lot more. I mean, I would say 3 times more for a 10x product manager than have 2 or 5 product managers or junior product managers and things like that. Of course, there is a society angles to it. There are problematic areas in it. But what I'm saying is that the style of, or the approach that you take to build a product has completely changed because of all these capabilities that are there. And yeah, it's something that entrepreneurs cannot ignore anymore.
So one of the things when we talk about talent is also talent density and geography, right? And if you look outside the Bay Area, I mean, you're in Berlin and in Europe, continental Europe. I'm based in Bangalore, so these are all kind of pockets of talent. In the past, the way this would happen is you'd have a mobile developer, you're doing a web application development. People could be anywhere, right? Freelancers. We worked with all of them, and they would build stuff for you. Here, it's different. So if I'm a founder or a builder outside the Bay Area, and I want to access this talent, to your point, I'd rather go and hire that 10% engineer or product manager because I get so much more ROI. Are builders in other locations at a disadvantage, or you think the talent gap is really, there's not such a huge gulf? Yes, Bay Area is still far ahead, but these other locations, Europe, India, we haven't talked about China, they're not too far along. What has been your observation?
I think the talent gap between Bay Area and other areas are a myth. That's my honest feedback. You know that we worked with teams in the Bay Area during the Cisco days, and I also kept in touch with some of the founders beyond that. But there's a commitment gap for sure, right? In Bay Area, there is definitely you throw money at the problem, which means that you pay them a lot of money, and you also expect a lot in terms of commitment. I've seen teams who are practically living in offices on Saturdays and Sundays, right? So pretty much weekend, day in, day out. And that's something that happens only in Bay Area. Maybe it also happens in Bangalore. It definitely happens in China for sure, right? So I've read enough to believe that. So there's always questions of whether this is healthy. And of course, I would be the first one to admit that this is unhealthy. But the fact is that you are running, like I said, you are managing an existential risk, right? So it's pretty much all hands on the deck approach for a lot of startups, because otherwise it's like you're playing Pac-Man, right? There is always going to be a more hungrier, leaner, and faster company who's come and just gobble you up. So it's kind of like it's a necessary bane when it comes to startups. So that's one part. But that being said, I don't think the talent problem exists, right, for other areas. Bangalore, well, I'm from Bangalore. I lived in Bangalore for a long time. We worked together in Bangalore. I still spend the bulk of my career I spent in Bangalore, right? So to me, there's never been a talent problem. There's definitely a commitment problem. One of the things I see as an advantage, especially in Europe, is the diversity, right? So if you look at like the sheer diversity of talent and thought in Berlin or Amsterdam, for that part, the part is amazing. I mean, you open an office, and then if you have 30 people, you probably have 30 nationalities. That brings a richness of perspective that's very, very hard to replicate. And I'm not saying this just for a few brownie points in terms of diversity or gender equality or something like that. There's definitely a benefit that you see in terms of thinking about this from a customer perspective as well. Because if you bring a diverse set of people, they think about the product and the product market fit and the value in different ways, and that itself can help you in terms of building a better product. So yeah, I don't think there's a technical talent problem. There's definitely a commitment problem. For example, in Berlin, they have a completely different way of looking at work-life balance, right? Friday by 4 o'clock they are out, and then they're enjoying their weekend. And God help you if there's a customer problem on Saturday, because only thing that you can tell the customers that I'll look at it on Monday, which is not there in Bay Area, right? But other than that, I don't see a problem. Now, specifically when it comes to Europe, there is a different problem. That's a fragmented go-to-market problem, right? So I mean, there's a saying that in US you try to build one product that serves 300 million people. In Europe, you build 27 products to build to serve 450 million people, right? It's not a single market. It's a 27 plus market with different languages, cultures, and business practices. your GTM, your go-to-market strategy that works in Germany might spectacularly fail in Spain, right? So um, it's a problem. It's definitely a serious problem, but it also helps you in some way that you're forced to do robustness in design and pricing and compliance from day one because of other things like GDPR and EUA.
So that you touched on my next topic, right? The difference between building in US and Europe, and I've seen your LinkedIn posts for a long time now, where you talk about the need to be agile from a regulatory and compliance perspective, so that Europe, can also be at the forefront of this innovation wave, right? I think your sentiments are in the right place. Has the EU gotten the EU AI Act right in your view, and is it helping move the pace of innovation along, or is it how does it stack up in your mind
Yeah.
compared to previous waves of regulation?
No, have they got it right? No, absolutely not. So if you've been following my post, I know that I've been pretty vocal on this, and many people disagree with me, and that's completely okay because look, the whole point is that you can have different perspectives. I mean, the thing with AI is that I don't think people are afraid of AI in itself. They are afraid of the uncertainty and they're afraid of surprises. And this is what drives EU primarily, right? And we talked about that when we talked about, like earlier, we talked about big enterprises, and then you say you worry about your career, right? Whereas in startups, you worry about your existence. Here also it's the same, right? So Europe is more worried about making a mistake. And to me, that itself is a mistake, right? The bigger mistake to me is not trying because you're afraid of a mistake and hence you're left behind. And we can clearly see that in the numbers, right? If you look at AI and technology and all the startups that are coming out from Europe, there's very few, right? I mean, there's Mistral, there's Lovable, there's a few companies like that, handful
Again,
compared to companies coming out from US or who are really absolutely killing it, right? And I mean, the same is also applicable for India, unfortunately, right? So we have startups, and I think a minister got a lot of flack. I guess 6-8 months back, where he said what we're really building is food delivery companies and quick commerce companies. We're not really building innovation, and a lot of people didn't like that. But there is an honest out of truth in that, and which is like, in terms of technology, especially in terms of AI, we're not innovating. And I absolutely understand that there are some innovations happening like Hanuman AI and Bashini and everything, right? So I'm not saying that there's no innovation happening there, but it's far unlimited in nature. And same is the case with Europe. So Europe, for example, in terms of a UA Act, it's like, to me, it's something that's done in a hurry without really thinking about the consequences of it, because they just wanted to make a claim that we are the first country or continent in the world to actually create an AI Act. And some of the restrictions and the approaches in there are absolutely killing innovation. And it's going to make it very hard for EU startups to scale. They can build because they always have this provision to say, if you're a small startup, some of these things don't apply to you. But the problem is not in terms of incubating startups. Europe has a lot of startups. I mean, in Berlin here's kind of like, I would say, the startup capital of the EU. There's a lot of startups in here. The problem is not in the startups or making it successful. So it's not building the startups or making it successful, but in terms of scaling it, really taking it from the place where it goes to like $1 billion in revenue to a place where it goes to 30 billion in revenues. And this is why a lot of the startups, once they reach a certain size, Klarna, if you take it for example, right? Once they reach the size of 30 billion plus in terms of valuation, the only way that you can move forward is actually go to US and scale there and IPO there, right? So this is a classic path that they take, and that's because it's so risk averse in Europe. They don't want to take this risk, and to me, that's the biggest risk, being risk averse.
what's the one thing that you would change if you could change in the EU AI Act to let these startups remain in Europe, scale, go IPO, create more opportunities, spawn even more startups and industries? What's the one change that you would like to see?
So more than the EU Act, I think there has to be some clarity or help in terms of scaling businesses in Europe. Like I said, the problem is not in terms of incubating startups or getting them to be successful. The problem is in terms of making it scale, right? So we talked about, I mean, part as a jest, but there is truth in it that in US you build one product to serve 300 million people. In Europe you build 27 products to serve 450 million people. You know that it doesn't work. The economy doesn't work, right? The economies of scale doesn't work. And the same is in terms of the administrative overheads. You need to have registrations across multiple countries, and all the cost as well as the delays that come with it. So what Europe really needs to do, from my perspective, is to actually have a regulation that helps people scale better, to really have the product move across the entire market, because they can really open up this market of 450 million people, which is going to be a force to reckon if we can do it. And that's what would make a difference. So unfortunately the focus is more on prevention than on acceleration. So if we can just flip that switch, flip that narrative, that's exactly what we need, because honestly Europe economy is not exactly doing great.
So there's plenty of room for change, but having said that, you did call out a few very exciting startups in from coming from Europe. Hugging Face is my favorite. So there's a lot that's happening over there. One topic, Robin, I want to touch on is leadership in the age of AI. Right. And again, we've all been in corporate roles, startup roles. What's fundamentally different about leading in this age of AI? And any lessons that you can share, right? You can draw upon what kind of tough conversation should we be having as a leadership team or with our CEOs or with our executives that we're not having, right? So much of this conversation seems to be about technology and or building, but what does leadership look like? What is going to be different about it, and what tough conversation should we be having that we're not having?
Yeah. I think we touched on speed, and I think especially in this current age, speed is one of the most important aspects. Not purely for the aspect of speed, but in terms of what it brings, right? The benefits of speed, like the distribution, like the product feedback that you get. And a key aspect of speed, right, in terms of for leaders is decision making. And this is one of the, to me, especially true in Europe, but I guess it's true everywhere, especially for large corporates, is the slow pace in which decisions are being made. I actually spend time on it because sometimes I get frustrated that certain decisions are not made, and then like these decisions were also not what I would consider as high cost decisions. So, for example, I told my team about this tactic that I use, saying, look, you think about the choice, right, and see if this choice is reversible in nature and the impact of this choice. And if this is reversible and you already know that it's not going to completely doom your company or be horrible in terms of impact, whether it's legal or regulatory or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, then you decide in 24 hours. Why do you need to have a committee on it and then have 10 rounds of reviews of a
Two-way
slide?
door versus the one-way door kind of a decision framework, right?
Exactly right. And if this is hard, I mean, this is a very difficult decision. Sleep on it. Maybe have one or two meetings and decide in 42, 72 hours, maybe. But either way, decide, move forward, because speed is a huge important factor. The second one, I think, again, in terms of leadership, is outcomes are always better than artifacts. And it's kind of like my background, right, where I come from. I started with Siemens, and then Siemens always valued process more than anything else. Not wrong, because they were shipping a lot of high-end equipment and people want stability more than anything else. But look, you measure success of a product, especially in the age of AI, by business calls, right? If I'm looking at WeFox, then I look at things like my AI models are measured by claims that are settled faster, fraud that's prevented, the customers that don't have to wait anymore before a claim is settled, right? Not by model accuracy. I don't care if the model is 95% accurate versus 65% accurate. It has a value, but there are much bigger things at play here. It's a little bit like law of large numbers, right? Would you invest in a model that predicts a successful stock 65% of the time, right? So if you go by a traditional model accuracy metrics, you would not, because 65% is a horrible accuracy number for a model to have. But if you're investing 1 billion, then the question is that how are you investing it? If you're investing it in a single stock, you have a 35% chance of losing the money if the model is 65% accurate. So you won't not. But if you break it down to 10K each and then investing in a lot of stocks, what the algorithm tells you, then the law of large numbers work for you, right? And then you will eventually make profits, 100%. Right? That's how law of large numbers work. So it's the 65% accuracy is something that has to be taken into context, right? It would be a good number if you're looking at the stock market, and then if you're spreading your risk, it would be an extremely bad number if you're doing a surgery based on it, right? I wouldn't do a surgery based on it if it's 65% accurate. Hell, I won't even do it if it's 90% accurate, because there's still a 10% risk. So the outcomes are better than artifacts and absolute KPIs, because it doesn't matter. And the last one, which is, I think, a super important one, which I learned by my mistakes, is the culture of clarity, right? So simple decision docs. You don't have to write a 300-page PRD or have the roadmaps as public, because that helps your team go in the right direction. And have weekly show me and don't tell me demos, right? So demos change behavior, slides change nothing. It's to have that culture of clarity where you actually say, show me, don't tell me. And you're not afraid of making your roadmap public, because it's a commitment, not just to your team but also to the world. So those would be the three things that I would think about what has changed and what needs to change in this world of AI, because speed in many ways is everything.
Yeah, no, I think these are great takeaways. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the customer side of things, right? So we're all builders, we're all passionate about building things, shipping products and features quickly, especially with AI. And then I see on the customer side, right, questions around security, data privacy, regulation, compliance. We briefly spoke about it. And enterprises moving much slower than that you would expect, right? What is the message to the leadership there, and how do you, even in your startup, right, currently, how are you engaging with them differently to force an outcome from an AI perspective versus traditional technology, right? They've been so I read somewhere that the average large enterprise uses about between 140 to 170 SaaS applications, which is massive, right? So they're already kind of over consumed with all these applications, and now there's this other wave of AI applications coming from startups, coming from hyperscalers, coming from your friendly SaaS vendor, right? And so now they have to make a lot of buying decisions. They're going through a lot of pilots. What's the approach there one should take, and what would be your message for those leaders who kind of live inside a large enterprise kind of a bubble?
You hit the nail on the head where you said an average enterprise is 60 or more SaaS applications. I would even venture a doubt that it's significantly more than that. In
I said
fact, there are now
I said
SaaS.
140 to 170, but go.
Yeah, that sounds like the right number. In fact, there are even SaaS applications which look at which audit your SaaS applications and tell you, where you can cut money and save costs, right? And some of them actually predict some huge cost benefits. So yes, the market is absolutely saturated with SaaS applications, and many organizations use multiple applications of the same type, and they're actually probably spending a lot of money on this. I think the key part in terms of the applications is not just about just trying out the next best thing, but going back to this outcome mentality. And so it's not about whether I'm using the latest and greatest when it comes to a SaaS application, but more like what outcomes are being gained from it. And there's definitely an aspect of economies of scale. And this is not just about saving money, right, in terms of SaaS subscriptions. It's more like saving money in terms of change management, in terms of people moving from one department to the other department, in terms of consistency when it comes to processes and so on. So um, I don't blame the enterprise leaders in terms of being a little bit slow in terms of new adoption, because they need to think about all these aspects. What's more important is, I mean, and you talked about it, right? This is the confusion of people when it comes to, or the uncertainty when it comes to AI products, right? And that's we talked about, people don't fear AI, they fear the uncertainty and the surprises. So there's always a question that what data do they keep from me. How are they going to use it? And should I be worried about whether it's going to impact me in some way? And transparency is the only way, right? So trust is a super important aspect when it comes to AI. And this is the other side of EU AI Act and GDPR and everything. So much as you could say about it slowing down speed, it gave some confidence to people that they are built according to a standard. And if there is something evil in that, then the government will get to know, the regulators will get to know. So that gives them a little bit of confidence. So that's an important angle, and we cannot discount it because there has to be trust in terms of people using these systems.
So there is some standard, right? There is some bar so people know how things are panning out. Last question from my side. What's in your AI stack? What does Robin use? What does he like? Tools, applications? What are your superpowers from an AI perspective?
I think I'm also one of those people who probably have too many SaaS subscriptions when it comes to AI. But I guess I pretty much use a lot of tools. So definitely my day-to-day thing, I use OpenAI for sure, right? I have, I use Codex. This is mostly for coding aspects. I'm still hands-on when it comes to coding. This is one of the things I didn't do that much when I was in Cisco because I was managing a very large team and I probably didn't have as much time. But I think things have changed a lot now in terms of I would expect all leaders up to the VP levels to be pretty much hands-on when it comes to technology. They don't have to code on a daily basis, but they need to definitely understand code and know code. And it's so easy to do that now. So OpenAI for sure, right? ChatGPT. Gemini, I like as it has an advantage in certain aspects. Notebook LM is amazing. Anytime you learn something, right? My favorite method is one of it is to use Notebook LM for sure. In fact, it's so popular that my children also like it. They use that for their learning. I introduced that to them. Of late, I'm super happy with Comet, the Perplexity browser, and I think it's amazing, right? So I don't watch those YouTube videos anymore. I kind of like put those videos in the Comet browser and ask it to give me a summary because some of these videos are like an hour long, maybe even 2 hours long, and frankly, none of us have the time to actually go through that. So you actually figure out what the most important messages are, and sometimes you go to those specific things. Now, there's always question of what this means to content creators, right? But let's look at that differently. So that's one side, and of course, if you really get into serious enterprise level coding, then there is of course Cloud Code, which is kind of like the system that we connect to almost all of our GitHub or whatever platforms, and it just does an amazing job when it comes to coding new features or even just understanding what has to be done in terms of. So let's say 20 years back or 10 years back, if I had to do a major change in terms of my code base, I had to ask for an estimation, validate an estimation, and go through this loop. Currently, I can just sit in my place and I get this estimation automatically from Cloud Code as an example, right, which is quite fast. Then there's all these things that I enjoy and experiment with. For example, there's various image generation tools that I use just for fun. There's VO, which is from Gemini platform, which is super amazing. I like Manus because Manus is kind of like this automated agent stack, which I use sometimes over making some slides. Gamma is something that I use.
I'm a huge fan of Gamma as well. Yeah.
Gamma is something that I use. And yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot, right? So I definitely have a pro subscription to probably too many things. Gemini for sure, Claude for sure, ChatGPT, and then Grok. I like Grok because Grok is probably, I would even say, has an advantage over Perplexity in terms of really figuring out the social media data because it has access to X, and then a lot of discussions when it comes to technology happens over X, and then people summarize it. It's one of the best sources of data when it comes to opinions, and opinions are important, especially when it comes to technology, rapid move technology like this. So yes, I use a lot of them, and mostly I think they're getting better and better, right? So my wife now makes fun of me that if one day all of these tools get get shut down, or a cloud gets in a standstill, then I can't think for myself anymore because I've forgotten how to think.
You would have created an agent Robin by then, so don't worry about it. Tell her agent
Hopefully.
Robin will take care of it by then, or an avatar of Robin will live in perpetuity and handle all the tasks. So this has been a fascinating discussion, Robin. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, and insights. There's a lot to learn and unpack. So how do people reach out to you? Where do we follow you? Is it LinkedIn? What's the best place to reach out to you?
Fastest is LinkedIn. They can send me a message, send me a connection request. Either way, I'm happy to connect to them, happy to talk to them. And of course, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you. And of course, it's always nice to meet an old friend again.
Okay. Thanks, Robin. Take care.
Take care.